This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stevenson with his own moves. Carrington. North are in front.
Hello, it's me. Just a little addendum before we get into the podcast proper. I did record this a little bit in advance and possibly before Taron Thomas maybe got himself in trouble again. So I'm not going to talk about the specifics of Taron Thomas's incident until we've got some more information. But suffice to say, he does get a mention in this episode, quite ironically, and potentially a prediction is already incorrect. But I just want to put that out there. Recorded in advance and immediately burnt. Second addendum, I just want to thank my two supporters so far on Buy Me a Coffee, so Plumpo and Matt Robinson. Thank you so much for supporting the show. And if anyone would like to get a shout out in the future, feel free to head to my Buy Me a Coffee page and support me. Anyway, let's go to the show proper. Hello and welcome back to yet another preseason podcast. I'm your host, Jason. This is North Pod, and it's good to be back behind the microphone. Couple of episodes in now. It is great to be back talking to you loyal North fans. It's still preseason, so it's still going to be preseason things, but I think we have a couple of interesting things to talk about this episode. Just a reminder to follow me on all that social media at NorthPod Show or at NorthPod on TikTok. Pretty much everything else is NorthPod Show. And like I mentioned last episode, I have got a Buy Me a Coffee, so you can check that link in the show notes. And if you feel like supporting the show, it's an option for you. So that's my socials stuff out of the way. I'm also requesting, begging, asking all of you fans that have been listening for a while, if you like the show, please give it a review or a rating, depending on your format of listening to podcasts. It really helps me out. And if you're writing a review on Apple Podcasts, I'll give you a shout out in the next available episode. That's the housekeeping out of the way. So as I said earlier on, we're certainly still in preseason mode. So last pod, we did a little over-unders, and because it took longer than I thought, so we're going to finish off the over-unders this episode, and then we're going to have a little look at the back line, do a bit of a season preview of the defence, look at what players we've got, in the stable, and how many of them might be getting a run on the park this year, and what kind of positional changes and we might be looking at, that kind of thing. I also probably just want to point out that I think I probably intend for these preview podcasts to be more based around what I'm hoping and what I would do, as opposed to kind of what I've heard or what I'm predicting. And obviously there's overlap between those things, but I just want to be clear that it's, I've got no inside word, and I'm probably not framing these as predictions, more so I'm framing them as what I'm hoping for. So, don't come at me if I predict something or I say something bad and it happens. But anyway, we'll get to those in a minute. We're just going to have a look at the over and unders, and these are kind of the more playful ones, the ones that maybe might make us smile or chuckle, as opposed to the more serious ones that we looked at last episode. Very serious stuff. 3.5 Aiden Core highlights. Obviously, I'd say most North fans have found themselves frustrated with Aiden Core at one stage or another over the past couple of years. I thought he ended the season, or his second half of 2023 was pretty good, and he produced a few highlights. Like, I can think of several from the back half of last year. He had that goal that Kane Turner gave to him on the overlap. I think a lot of North fans memed that goal. He took that. I can never remember the player in the team, but he absolutely stepped someone in the back pocket. It looked like he was done for all money and just faked a kick and went round them with a little step that was phenomenal. And I also remember him splitting Brad Hill absolutely open with a bump. I think he may have got a week for it. I don't recall, but it was an absolutely fair. It was one of those ones where he lined him up and smashed him, and Hill, I think, broke some ribs or certainly missed a couple of games. So there's 3 big highlights from Aiden Core from last year. So if he continues that kind of highlight form, yeah, I think it's over. I think more than 3.5 highlight plays from Aiden Core this year. It's going to be big year. He turns 30, and I think we can expect 6 or 7 highlights like that, because the ball's going to be down there a fair bit, and he's one of the only players that I could nearly guarantee is going to be down there. So yeah, I'm going over for that one. Staying in the same part of the ground, 5.5 Luke McDonald games where the fans are asking for him to be dropped. Yeah, it did feel like every second game last year at times, unfortunately for LMAC. And I think I'm going to back him in, not necessarily to get back to those heights, but I think we could have under. I think maybe there's probably going to be 3 or 4 games where the fans are really on his back, and part of the pressure that's on him is because he's a co-captain, and we've got high expectations for our captains, you would think. But I don't think he's going to have as bad a year as he had last year. I think we're back to maybe an average Luke McDonald kind of performance. So I think under. Let's hope and manifest that this year's going to be better than last year for LMAC, and we'll say under. This one came from one of my Reddit user suggestions. Taron Thomas, 9.5 games until a scandal. I am taking the over on this one, and the only reason I'm doing that is because the bye comes shortly after that. I think it's round 12 for us. We play 11 games. So that's, if there's going to be a controversy, that's when I'm tipping maybe it could happen for Taron. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope that he has a brilliant year, and maybe the contract year element is at play here. But yeah, we know that, he seems to have made lots, or at least a handful of, really poor decisions in the last few years. I hope that we're done with those, but he's only a mistake or 2 away from a scandal, poor Taron. And he's put himself in that situation where if he does make a small mistake, he will get crucified for it just because of his record. So yeah, I'm going to take the over on round 9.5, but that's just because of the bye. To be honest, I think the bye is the danger zone. This one hurts a little bit. Charlie Comben has 2.5 separate injuries which preclude him from playing. Look, he only had one last year, in fairness to Charlie, but it was one that kept him out for the rest of the year. And prior to that, he has been quite injury prone. It feels a bit cruel putting this over-under on him for the Chom. So I'm going to say under. I would be stunned if he gets through the year without an injury, but surely it's 1 or 2 and it's not 3+. I'm going to take under, Chom. I'm backing you in. You're a fellow podcaster of sorts, and us podcast brethren have got to stick together. So I will say I'm taking under. I think you're going to have a relatively nearly flawless, healthy year. And who knows, maybe that transition to the back line will help him stay fit. I do think you tend to get smashed less and less. You're a Lockie Hansen type who consistently runs backward into packs. Hopefully Chom's not doing that. His body is far too important for us. So just don't go when you don't need to, Chom. That's my advice. Nothing silly. 2 to go. As I said, I'm just going to whip through these over-unders, I think, so we can move on to the defence. Charlie Lazaro plays 2.5 games as the sub. He played 3 games as the sub last year, and that was half his games tally. He played 6 games, 3 of them were as the sub. He played 1 pretty awful game, I can't remember who that was against, as a full game, and 2 relatively decent games when he was playing a full game. Certainly that last round against the Gold Coast, and I think the other one might have been the Geelong game. He played relatively well. 2.5 games as the sub. I'm taking under, and that's really based on the fact that I don't know if he's going to play that many games. That being said, I think if he's playing, he is a good chance to be the sub like he was last year. So it's a risky one, but I'm taking under. I could see him being sub once or twice, but yeah, I just don't know how he breaks into the side. Maybe if there's some injuries in the wing, or we're absolutely depleted in the midfield, or if he reinvents himself in another position. I don't know. That's the plan for him, but yeah, I'm taking under for that one. And last one, again, this one did come from a Reddit user. Number of Kane Corns unnecessary snipes and articles in the year is 27.5, and I think we're all taking over on that. Kane Corns is the king of saying stuff just to get a reaction, and North Melbourne fans, we are not going to react. We are going to ignore, because the more we react to it, the more he's going to do it. And I cannot believe that people haven't figured that out yet. The less attention we give those kind of provocative commentators, the better off we'll be in the long term. But I think secretly a lot of people love to hate that kind of person in the media. So definitely over. Cornsy's going to keep saying it. And around the time when we're playing Port Adelaide, I've no doubt that it'll amp up. So over 27.5, probably triple figures if we had to be honest. All right, let's transition now into looking at the defence for the year. As I said at the top, it's not a prediction. It's more, I guess, my analysis and my thoughts on what we're going to do. But I'm not saying that I've heard anything. This is just based on what I think. I really hope I'm being clear with that. So I've just listed here the players who either are definitely defenders, or, you know, there's some talk they could be, or a chance they play somewhat in defence. So Aiden Corr, Cole McKercher, Luke McDonald, Darcy Tucker, Zach Fisher, Riley Hardiman, Will Dawson, Griffin Logue, Miller Bergman, Biggie Newen, Charlie Comben, Josh Goder, Toby Pink, Braden George, Jackson Archer, Blake Drury, Callan Dawson, and Harry Sheezel. There's probably several there that you're thinking, gee, I don't know if they're playing defence, and I will get to it. So I've said of that lot, the ones that are either definitely key backs or at least can play on a key forward would be Logue, both of the Dawsons. It's crazy that we've got two Dawsons that are key defenders. Newen, Comben, Pink, and Corr. Certainly some of those like Pink, Corr, even really Callan Dawson and Biggie Newen, I don't know that I'd want playing on the number one forward from the opposition. They're probably more hybrid types, but you know, in a pinch they do play a second or third tall. I've said here sort of the others that definitely are defenders: McDonald, Fisher, Hardiman, Bergman, Goder, and Archer, although we know that Fisher can be flexible. And then the leftovers. So I'd say Drury and Tucker, you know, some could play or have at times toyed with the idea of playing off halfback. There's been some talk that Braden George is training with the defence group, so I've put him there. Similarly, there's been some talk that McKercher is going to play off halfback, and we saw Sheezel do that last year. So that's kind of where I've grouped the players in terms of what we've got. So it's a good bunch there. We've got plenty to choose from in this area of the ground. It's just really inexperienced, particularly, obviously, with Griffin Logue out. So I'll talk about most of this because the first half of the year, I think we're expecting that we're going to be without Logue. So we've got to think, besides him, you know, what have we got? So in terms of who I think is a lock, who's definitely in the side round one if they're fit, Chom, Charlie Comben has to take the best tool, which is scary because he's played 9 AFL games and none of them in defence, but certainly he's a ripper athlete. He's, I think, 199, 95 kegs, give or take. He's had a long, you know, block of getting fit and kind of preparing for this. So whilst I'm not sure that he's going to smash it straight away, I think he has all the attributes to end up like a Robbie Tarrant, for example. I mean, like a Ben Mackay, but I think probably more athletic. And hopefully a bit more interested in playing for North Melbourne. So yeah, I think he definitely plays, and that's certainly all the talk. Zach Fisher, who we recruited from Carlton, has to play off half-back. I do think that there'll be opportunities for him to play in the forward line as well, but I think he's that accumulator and distributor off half-back. Almost replaces what Sheezel did for us last year. I'm not sure what kind of defensive attributes he brings, to be honest. I haven't watched a lot of him, but I certainly hope that he can lock down on a player as well, but I'm not sure that's going to be his primary role. I think it is going to be distributing and kicking out of the back line, but I definitely think he's in there. Certainly for the start of the year, and I think probably for the whole year, form allowing, Aiden Corr's in there, and he will take either a medium or a tall, depending on the rest of our lineup and also depending on what the opposition looks like. If we're playing someone like Geelong tomorrow, I would have him in to be able to at least be third man up in a Jeremy Cameron, Tom Hawkins kind of marking contest. I think any team with two definite talls or three talls, Aiden Corr is taking the third of those talls, or he's helping out on the second, but he's not quite big enough to play a fullback, and that's why we've got Combat in the side. But I definitely think Corr's form second half of last year warrants a starting position. And Luke McDonald, hopefully what I would be looking for him is to play as a loose interceptor rather than a lockdown defender. We've seen what he looks like as a lockdown defender at the moment. He got absolutely torched by several teams last year, and I know that wasn't all him. It's a team defense, but I just don't think he has the physical attributes to go with some of those crafty small forwards, and he's not really tall and strong enough to, play Aiden Corr's role. So I'd like to see him as an interceptor, off half-back, and obviously he still has a player, but maybe you're putting him on the opposition's least dangerous forward, and you're hoping that he can drop off them and intercept and reinvent himself a little bit. I think in 2020 that was some of the best that that was when he was at his best. I think he was playing loose at times in 2020 and really racking up those intercept possessions. So that's what I'm hoping from him. I do think that Harry Sheezel's a lock. So if you thought, oh my goodness, he's left out Sheez, he's absolutely a lock, but I don't think he's a lock in the back line. I think it's going to be forward and midfield for him. And maybe he goes into the back line at times, but maybe when things aren't going so well and the ball's not getting forward of, the middle of the ground, or maybe if we've got injuries in the back line and we want a reliable, classy ball user down there, then we know he can do it. He won the Rising Star doing it. But I think, personally, I'd be putting him and Taron Thomas on a bit of a swapping forward midfield role and leaving him mostly out of the back line. So definitely plays, just not sure that he plays in the back line. So then it just becomes the question of who else is playing. So there's a big list here of either leftovers or I think we'll get some game time. So I think these ones are going to play. It's just maybe they're not every game. Josh Goda, for me, I love Goda, or I love the idea of Goda. Great distributor, but also has the height and strength to compete in the air when required. So I think he's 190. He's in the 80 kilo to 90 kilo range. I'm just hopeful that he can get fit this year. I know there was some talk in the early time trials that he wasn't super fit, and he did have a lot of injuries, particularly knee injuries last year, that I thought really limited his athletic ability. So I really want him to play. I think his height gives him a bit of a point of difference, and his bulkiness in terms of a medium defender. I think playing, Core and Goda alongside of each other gives you a real balance of, capacity to take the game on, but also ability to compete in the air. So I'd really love to see Goda get a game. A lot of the talk at the start of the year or in early preseason was that McKercher was going to play the Harry Sheezel role off half-back. But then when we've seen some more training here in January, it's looked like maybe McKercher's training with the mids. I mean, he's going to play games this year, and I probably will have him in my starting 22, 23. I'm just not sure whether he's playing in the midfield or off half-back at this stage. So maybe we chuck him in like we did with Wardlaw last year in the midfield and give him a crack. But yeah, I think there's potential for him to be sort of plugging holes in terms of whether we need an extra mid or we need an extra defender. Maybe he starts on the bench and he's able to rotate through both those positions and be a bit of a Sally's gap filler. But yeah, he definitely plays at times. Bergman's another one, similar to Goda. I think he's really reliable with ball in hand. It's just whether or not he can add to his defensive capabilities, put on a bit of strength. You probably don't want him to completely bulk up, but you need to be strong enough to compete in the air and put your head over it. So I know that when he's got the ball, he's pretty reliable with it. It's just whether or not he gets enough and distributes it in a positive way, and also whether or not he can shut down his opponent. So certainly him and Goda are going to compete for one position, I think, off halfback, but we know at times, a couple of times last year, they did play together. And finally, in terms of who I think will get opportunities pretty soon, I think Callan Dawson deserves the chance to, have a run at it. I'm not sure if he plays alongside Core and Comben or if it has to be, only two of those. I'm not sure. My feeling is that we can play Dawson or whoever it is. We can play Core and Comben and another tool. And I think it should be Dawson. I think Callan Dawson should get a crack at it. He's 196 centimetres. We're better off having three players that are 195 plus in the back line. Sure, it makes us a bit slow, but we've got Zach Fisher. We've potentially got McKercher. Goda and Bergman are both good distributors. McDonald should be a good distributor when he's under less pressure at least. So yeah, I would like to see, and I'd be having Callan Dawson in the side, particularly when we're coming up against a taller forward line for the opposition. So then we've got some leftovers. So Pink, Newen, Takajuri, Hardiman, Will Dawson, and Jackson Archer are those that I haven't really mentioned. I think the way I see Toby Pink is that he's great insurance, and you never know, you could have a diamond in the rough. I think whilst Griffin's out, there's going to be an opportunity for him, and who knows, maybe inside the club, he's rated more highly than Callan Dawson. I don't know. But yeah, I think his opportunities will probably come prior to Griffin Logue coming back. I struggle to see how he gets in if and when the big Griff comes back, but it'd be great to see the big redhead out there running around. And we know that at least he's a big body. He doesn't have any AFL playing experience, but he has experience being on a list. He was fantastic in the Sandful last year. He's a mature body. I think he's 25 or 26. So yeah, he's definitely a chance in the first half of the year, but he's not up there for me. Biggie Newen is a real absolute wild card. I think there's been a lot of enthusiasm about him, and I think a lot of that's based off his athleticism and his potential. But I do think we have to bear in mind that he spent 4 years on the Richmond list, played one game, and it wasn't last year, it was 2022, and they were essentially happy to delist him. We traded for him, but it was only because it made the transaction a bit easier for us. It's not worth worrying about, but we traded for him, but it wasn't a pick that we were ever going to use, and I don't know that it was a pick that Richmond used either. So we got him for nothing like we did Pink. I think he's worth a crack. He's obviously very athletic. He can play ruck or defence or forward potentially. It looks like he's training to be a backman, and that's the role that he played for his one game for Richmond and also in Richmond's VFL side. But yeah, I guess it's just what can he do besides being athletic is the question. So can he become a reliable mark? Can he become a reliable interceptor? Can he distribute? He needs to bring something in the VFL, I think, to get an opportunity. But I mean, he's training the house down. That's what I'm hearing from training. So maybe he's in the side in round one, but somehow I don't think so. I think for me at least, he's probably last in line for those those big, tall positions, but I'm happy to be proven wrong. As I mentioned earlier, I think Darcy Tucker and Blake Drury, there's just not a spot for them off halfback unless we're really hit by injuries. Drury was playing some halfback in the VFL last year, but then kind of swapped to be a half forward because that was a role that I think either he or the club thought was giving him a better chance of getting in the side. I think I'd prefer to see him as a half forward. And look, Darcy Tucker's a utility. Really, he could be on the wing, he could be off halfback, he can be off half forward. I don't think we need him off halfback, so I don't think either of those are options that I'd be looking at for the back line. Riley Hardiman's a really interesting one because, you know, he was a relatively high draft pick, so there's obviously some skill there, and the smaller players often find it easier to get a game early in the AFL. I've got no read on where he sits in the pecking order in terms of those sort of medium defenders, because that's kind of the group that he's in. I think he's got a similar skill set to Zach Fisher, but he's got a bit more height, and he's probably, you know, he's a left footer, which helps. So maybe it's a Bergman and a Gota that he's competing with, or a McKercher if he's playing in defence. So I don't really have a read on him. He absolutely could start in round one, but I guess I'm waiting to see what the match sim and the practice matches look like for him. Maybe it is that he can turn himself into a lockdown defender that can hurt the opposition going the other way, but you know, his attributes are his pace and his penetrating left foot kick. So that you've always got to play into your strengths, I think. But what else can how else can you make yourself stand out, I suppose, is the question that I'd be asking him. And, you know, our team is crying out for medium, small defenders that can really lock down the small forwards of the opposition. So if he could do that, I think that he'd go a long way towards putting himself in the side. Will Dawson, I don't think it's worth really talking about. I think it's a development year for him. He's 200 centimetres. He's been drafted, or he's playing as a defender, but technically he could be a ruck or a defender or a forward. I think long term he's probably a defender for us, but yeah, he's a project. I don't think he's going to get a game this year, and that seems to be all the talk. We know that Griff's not right yet, and I really hope we don't rush him. I know that he had a fantastic time trial run, which is great, but you know, we know that the changing directions and spinning and that kind of thing, the stress that puts on your knee is different to running in a straight line, you know, with under no duress. So please don't rush him back. Let's make sure we get him right, because he's a super important player for us for the next 5 or so years. And then Jackson Archer, a really interesting one. He's mid 180 centimetre. I think he might be 184. He's pretty quick. But yeah, I don't know in the pecking order behind Gota, Bergman, all those other mediums. I don't know where he fits in. He almost, to me, looks like he's a bit of an Aiden Core replacement. He's a 10 centimetres shorter than him, but I think he can play a similar role in that he can be third man up. He's very athletic. He's got courage, but I mean, again, like maybe he's a lockdown option. I'm not sure. So I think for me, he will probably get opportunities when there's injuries. I don't see him as being best 23 when everyone's fit. But I mean, yeah, that just goes to the relative depth of this backline in that we've got heaps of players there, and there's not a lot of standouts. Like Combin's a standout as someone who's never played in defence and who's played 9 games of AFL footy. Fisher and Core and McDonald are in there because we know that they're experienced. None of them are superstars. Like the back line does worry me from a perspective of there's just not a lot of players in there that you can absolutely take to the bank and rely on them. So the back line I think is the weakest area of the ground for us. I don't think that's news to anyone. We know that it's inexperienced, and you know, particularly if Sheezel goes out of there, we don't have a star back there. Thank goodness we traded for Griffin Logue, 18 months ago. I know that he's out at the moment. He's not going to play the first half of the year, but I just can't stop thinking about how bleak this defence would be if in paper he wasn't there. Yeah, it's a real concern. So I've just jotted down a couple of talking points for the defence, and I've already kind of touched on them, but who's locking down the smalls? So we know that last year Toby Green torched us, Cody Waitman torched us. Like, they're two that comes to mind in terms of small forwards from the opposition that really we didn't put a glove on all game. And, Luke McDonald did get a lot of the blame for that last year, and he was partly to blame, but certainly there were plenty of others that had some responsibility there. Jack Zeeble was playing that role at times last year too. And I think it's worth noting that, he was a really reliable cog in that defence last year alongside Ben Mackay. Sure, he made mistakes with the ball, but he did a pretty solid job of spoiling and intercepting. So it's going to be interesting to see how the defence functions without that footy brain, because whilst his body did start to fail him and his skills started to fail him in the last couple of years of his career, Zeebs knew where the ball was and knew how to get it. So, yeah, I don't know who is locking down. Look, technically, someone like Zach Fisher should, but I don't think that's what he's touted as. And probably, to be fair, his first priority should be around distributing and getting the ball out of defence. So I don't know that it should be left up to him. Whether or not it's someone like Bergman or someone like Archer or potentially Blake Drury, one of these types that could come in and play a real lockdown role. Maybe it's Riley Hardiman. Like, there's just no one on that list there that I've read out that jumps off the page as that really dour, small or medium forward. Defence, to play on those small forwards. And, you can only address so many needs at the draft, but I also think that typically defensive type players, don't get addressed in the draft. I think typically those kinds of players are moulded. You draft someone, turns out they don't quite have the skill set that you were looking for in a certain area, and then the guys at the club try and figure out, well, what can this guy do? So I think that's what I'd be doing. I'd be looking at this list of sort of 5 or 6 medium to small defenders and figuring out, we know Luke McDonald can't do a fantastic lockdown job on those players, so can Fisher do it? Or can Goder or Bergman do it? I think they're probably too tall, but, I'll leave that to the side. Can Biggie Newen do it as a really athletic but much taller player? Can Riley Hardiman do it? Or Blake Drury or Darcy Tucker or Jackson Archer? Or even, I haven't mentioned him at all because he's never played the position, but Curtis Taylor is another one that I'd be thinking about, where does he get a game and can you reinvent him? He was kind of playing as a tagger at times at the end of last year, so do you take that skill set and put it in the defence? There's a lot of options there. I don't have the answer, to be honest, because I haven't seen any of those players really play that role. But if I was going to pick one right now, I don't know enough about Hardiman. Like, I think I'd be going Jackson Archer, to be honest. Bergman, I don't know if he's strong enough yet. He's probably next in line, but Jackson Archer has that real rugged, dog at a bone attitude. He's tough, competitive. I think you need all of those things to be a real lockdown defender. So maybe it's him. I'm not sure, but I think that's a question that hopefully we have an answer to by the end of the year. Who emerges from that tall group at the top of the pecking order? So I think we all agree that Griffin Logue and Charlie Comben are our two pillars, and that Aiden Core is that kind of that hybrid in between. But in terms of the others underneath, like who's next in line, I think it should be Callan Dawson. Look, we'll see. I think Will Dawson you can put way down the bottom for now. He's the project. I think he's playing if and only if there's a major earthquake, Arden Street, and half the players fall in a crack in the ground. I just think you really work on crafting him in the VFL. So I think I'd be going Callan Dawson, then Toby Pink, then Biggie Newen. But yeah, I think that's going to be interesting to track during the year and see, whether or not someone really stamps themselves as that next man up as the tall. Another question or talking point, McKercher and Sheezel, do they play off halfback? And I certainly hope that Sheezel doesn't for most of the game, or most of the year rather. I'd love to see McKercher do that a bit, but I don't also want to see him get stuck in that role like Sheezel did last year. And Sure, Sheezel got thrown forward a couple of times, but he played 95% of his game time in defence last year, and he won a Rising Star. He was phenomenal, but I think we've got to figure out where these players are going to be playing when we're playing our best football. So I'm happy for McKercher to learn a bit in the back line, but I do want to see him get some midfield exposure, because we know that long term that's what he's going to be doing, or at least that's what we hope. Who becomes our most reliable option to rebound the ball out of D50? So I guess there's a couple of questions there, like who's kicking it out? We know that Zeebs did that a lot last year, and Sheezel did that a lot last year, and probably neither of them are playing in defence. Certainly Zeebel won't be, unless Richmond decide to release him from his assistant coaching role so he can make a comeback. So whether or not that's Zach Fisher or whether it's Charlie Comben, I'm not sure who's kicking out or has the main responsibility, but that's something that's worth thinking about. Who's the best kick that can kick it a good 40 metres or give us a good dart 20 metres sideways? And then who are those rebounding defenders that can make good, quick decisions under pressure? Because we know, we think about what Ben Mackay did last year, he couldn't kick, and that's okay, but it just meant that every time he marked it, you knew that he was going to be looking for a chip kick 25 metres to the side, something that was almost unmissable. We did see him miss that one against West Coast where it almost came off his knee. But precision kicking wasn't his thing. So we've got to figure out, is it Bergman and Goad that are biting off those tricky kicks? Who is it? Certainly seems like Zach Fisher will be taking on some of that, but whether or not that's McKercher, whether Sheezel's still there doing that, I think we want to figure out who are those reliable rebounding 50 players for us. And the final talking point, can Luke McDonald return to form, and what does that role look like for him? I talked a bit about it earlier on. I think I really want to see him playing as a loose man all the time. I don't want to see him responsible for those crafty small forwards. That's what I would like to see. And if we can't manufacture a situation where he's loose in defence, maybe it means that he needs to be playing some wing time. I think, all the talk is that Bailey Scott and Dylan Stephens are going to pretty much dominate either wing. And I think that's great. But obviously there's, probably a 20% of game time for either of them that they're sitting on the pine. So maybe it is that McDonald could step in for 40% of the game time and play some wing. I just think the defensive side of the game in terms of running and chasing he's not great at, but I do think that he has good instincts in terms of how to hunt the ball, where to go to intercept. And, maybe that's a way that we could quote-unquote reinvent him. I don't know that it's a reinvention. It's almost like stepping back in time, but yeah, I just really hope that we can see somewhat of a return to form for him, whatever that looks like. I don't think he's going to get back to his best and fairest winning form, but I would love to at least, I'd love him to be playing to the level where the fans are off his back. I was frustrated with him at times last year. I think most North fans were, but I would be sure that no one was more frustrated than him. He's really competitive, and he's a great clubman. He loves the club. So I hope that we can get him back to form, but I also think that's part of that onus is on the club to figure out how to utilise him best and utilise his skill set, because we don't want to be in that situation that we were for the second half of last year where half the fans, or at least the vocal half of the fans, are calling for him to be put out of the side because he's still the co-captain. And if one of your captains is in such bad form that the fans want them dropped, I think we're not in a good way. So that is my thoughts, my preview, if you will, on the defence. I think I speak for most North fans when I say it's the area of the ground that worries me most, but there's so much youth and potential there. I think it's going to be a great finding out year for the defence. And taking out Ben Mackay, Jack Zeebel, and at times Aaron Hall, taking those three out, it's going to be really interesting to see what this defence looks like. Let's not forget we also took Aiden Bonner out So 4 massive outs in this back line from last year. It's going to be really interesting to see who kind of rises to the top and asserts himself as a definite starter in that back 6 or 7. So hopefully that's somewhat interesting. Hit me up with your thoughts on social media and let me know who you think the starting 7 or so defenders should be. Because typically you'll obviously have your 6, and then typically you'll have someone who's kind of defensive-minded on the bench or someone somewhere else on the ground that can chop out in there. So, yeah, let me know what you all think at NorthPod Show on most social media if you want to get in touch. And, yeah, I will speak to you all in a week or so. Have a great week and go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of NorthPod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at NorthPod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.